Hi, everybody. I'm Brittany Lewis, a breaking news reporter here at Forbes. Joining me now is Congressman Greg Casar. Congressman, I appreciate you coming on.
Thanks so much to you in the newsroom for having me.
Of course, you've been a freshman member of the 118th Congress now for a little over 2 months. Tell us, how has it been going?
Well, I thought I was going to get sworn in at the very beginning of January. And as y'all probably saw in the news or have heard from other members of Congress, that process got delayed by several days, the longest swearing in process since before the Civil War. And to me, that wasn't necessarily frustrating for me. I knew eventually we would get sworn in. But what was worrisome and what I think is really building up right now in Congress is that those same tactics that kept us as members of Congress from being sworn in could be used for doing things like holding up the United States Congress ability to pay our debts and to potentially threaten a lot of our basic programs like Medicare, Medicaid, Social Security, affordable housing programs, SNAP, and food benefits. And so being a brand new Democratic member of Congress has really shown me how there are really extreme elements within the Congress that are potentially threatening to keep us from doing our basic job when really there's so many working people that need our help. And so I want to be part of a movement of members of Congress that are taking us away from waging these attacks over culture wars and instead moving the country forward and helping support working families.
Sure, what you're referring to is the House Speaker vote, obviously. It really started this Congress on a chaotic foot. As you mentioned, it was historic. Now, 2 months after that, when you're sitting and you're reflecting on that moment, are you thinking, hey, I can work with the Republican Party, they can work with Democrats? Or do you think Congress right now is more divided than ever?
I believe in making compromise to move us forward. Just what I won't support is compromising our values and moving us backward. And the vast majority of people, even in places like Texas, including places like Texas, want to see us restore abortion rights, want to see us work on comprehensive immigration reform. They want to see the minimum wage rise. They want to see us tackle the climate crisis and create good union jobs for people. If anybody of any party wants to work on those issues, I'm ready to sit down and work with folks on making things better for folks in this country. Unfortunately, in places like Texas, we see top officials from Texas targeting drag performers, targeting and bullying kids at their school, threatening to cut vital programs like food benefits that keep our kids fed, passing the blame onto immigrant families for the fentanyl crisis rather than working on things like addiction services and mental health support for people in our communities. And so in Texas, we're seeing such a sprint to the extreme right that it leaves the majority of people behind. And I'm ready to compromise and work with people as a progressive to do the kind of work that most people want us to do. And I hope that in the US House, instead of continuing this sprint to the extreme right, we see Democrats and Republicans come together on things like helping workers, helping raise wages, taking on corporate monopolies, taking on the climate crisis that we know has been fueled by too long not paying attention to the real environmental needs in our state.
Congressman, I hear how passionate you are. And as you know, as our viewers know, Democrats do have control of the Senate, but Republicans have control of the House. You listed a litany of things you want to get accomplished this term. Realistically, what do you think a divided government can achieve within the next a little less than 2 years?
Well, no matter who controls the House or the Senate, the president has very powerful and important authority to create progress for the American people. And so we will be working and pushing the Biden administration to do more for gun safety policy. That's something that can be done administratively. In Texas, we know we had this horrific slaughter and murders in Uvalde of school children and teachers. This president needs to continue to do the important work on the administrative side for gun safety until the Congress gets back to where we were in the early 90s and pass things like a bipartisan ban on the sale of assault weapons and weapons of war. The president has the authority and the ability to push forward new rules to guarantee more workers the right to overtime pay, We know that there's lots of folks that are working 50, 60 hours a week, but aren't paid overtime for that work they do above 40 hours because they're categorized essentially as a middle wage salaried employee. And so they can work 60 hours a week and not make any more money for it. The president, we want to work together with him to instate rules to guarantee people that overtime pay. We also are implementing things like the Infrastructure and Jobs Act to create millions of union jobs to repair our aging infrastructure. The Inflation Reduction Act and its climate provisions to invest in clean, renewable energy so that Texans can rely that the lights will actually turn on when they flip the lights on. That kind of work has all can be done by President Biden working in conjunction with House and Senate Democrats, because a lot of it's already been passed into law, and now we need to implement it well on behalf of the American people.
Congressman, you mentioned a few times now workers' rights, things like that. In this conversation, I know that you were a labor organizer. You also, before you got elected to Congress, you were an Austin City Council member. So let's just start from the beginning here. What drew you to politics?
I started out as an immigrants' rights organizer and as a labor organizer working in Texas, the state where I was born and raised. There are so many people that contribute so much to making our economy run, but the folks that we called essential workers during this pandemic, but who were never given the essential protections that they need. When I started out as a young organizer, the demand that we were making on behalf of construction workers we're organizing alongside was just the right to a water break. And we asked and pushed some big companies to guarantee workers water breaks in the 110-degree Texas sun. And the first law that I ever got passed wasn't when I was an elected official, it was actually as an organizer bringing families together, asking city council to guarantee a 15-minute water break during the day for construction workers. We finally got that law passed. But even today, nearly 14 years later, the Texas legislature is still considering passing bills to get rid of water breaks. As a city council member, after I was an organizer, ran for for local office, became a city council member, passed things like eviction protections, passed policies to raise the minimum wage for people working on city projects up to $15 an hour, now up to $20 an hour minimum. Again, now today we're seeing the state legislature not working to help people, but to potentially go and undo things like a $15 an hour minimum wage, go and undo things like water breaks or eviction protections for renters. And that's part of what pushed me to run for the United States Congress. No matter how much people on the ground in their local neighborhoods, at their local city councils, try to make life better for everyday Texans, right now Texas is run by a set of officials that want to undo any progress in the state. And our history in this country shows that when people of conscience in the Congress act together for the common good, you can overcome what a greedy or capricious or racist governor is up to. In the past, you had these horrible restrictions on voting against Black Texans and people of color. It wasn't a Texas governor that solved that. It was members of the United States Congress pushing for the Civil Rights Act, passing the Voting Rights Act, and having a Texas president, Lyndon Baines Johnson, sign the Voting Rights Act into law, sign Medicaid into law, sign Head Start into law. I think we're in a similar moment where when our Texas officials like Governor Greg Abbott are spending their time targeting immigrants, targeting workers' rights, all at the benefit of the biggest corporations and his right-wing donors, I think the only way you break through that and make life better for people is for the Congress to go and codify abortion rights permanently into law, passing the Women's Health Protection Act, pass the John Lewis Voting Rights Act to restore voting rights fully in Texas, pass the Equality Act to fully protect our LGBTQ neighbors, pass the PRO Act to, again, protect union rights in Texas so that people can organize and so that the Texas economy that is continuing to grow actually benefits the majority of working Texans rather than just the top 1% of 1%.
Congressman, once again, I do hear how passionate you are. I know that you are a vocal critic of your home state's governor, Texas Governor Greg Abbott. I did hear you say the term racist governor. Are you downright calling Governor Greg Abbott racist?
Well, we talk all the time about how your actions speak louder than your words. And I've seen this governor time and time again prioritize show me your papers laws against immigrants rather than prioritizing our schools. During the pandemic, when we should have been spending our time saving lives, he was targeting trans kids, kids that are already having a tough time oftentimes, instead spending his time bullying those kids. And so I leave it up to everyday Texans to determine what their opinions are. I don't know what's in anybody's heart, but what I do know are his actions have specifically hurt working Texans, black, white, and brown.
Let's get into the border since you already started discussing it. As we all know, you do represent a district in Texas, and the southern border has really been a hot button issue for years. Border Patrol Chief Raul Ortiz said earlier this month that parts of the U.S.-Mexico border are a, quote, crisis situation, and that DHS does not have, quote, operational control of our entire border. Do you agree? Do you think that there is a crisis at the southern border?
What we actually have is a humanitarian crisis of people being displaced from their countries all throughout the Western Hemisphere. And if we don't actually solve that crisis, then we will never make things better on immigrants and on native-born Americans. We need to actually help stabilize countries across the Western Hemisphere, bring everybody to the table, make sure that folks can live in peace and prosperity everywhere in our country and in countries abroad. If we don't start targeting that issue, then we aren't talking about the real crisis that's happening. And then when folks are having to flee economic disaster, when people are having to flee danger, our country has an incredible history of actually accepting folks, figuring out the best way for people to become an integral part of our economy and our society. And that's really what makes Texas and so much of this country a great place to live. That is what we should really be focusing on, is making sure we set up lawful and orderly pathways for people to be able to immigrate here. Lawful and orderly ways that when somebody is fleeing economic disaster, they're not having to traverse dangerous territory, sometimes having to pay criminal organizations, endanger their own lives in order to become a part of the United States. That's just not right. And so instead of blaming and targeting immigrants who are they themselves fleeing disaster, we should look at reforming our system to create a safer, more humane and orderly system for people. And that's the best way, I think, that we can relieve pressure on those officials that you brought up and continue to create the thriving and great economy that we've built in Texas, because we're essentially a multicultural society.
Let's talk about the specifics of how we solve that humanitarian crisis. You've called it that before. Republicans have called it a crisis. Democrats say there's a problem. So it sounds like multiple parties are saying, hey, there's a problem here at the border. There's different, obviously, avenues to solve it. Yourself, along with close to 80 other lawmakers, sent a letter criticizing some of the Biden administration's border policies. You said, quote, the expansion of Title 42 and the transit ban will not solve this humanitarian crisis. So simply put, what would your solution be?
Simply put, the Biden administration's actions essentially were in two parts. And one part is really a key part of the solution. And it's the second part that I think that is short-sighted. The first part is to create visas and legal pathways for people that are escaping violence in some of these destabilized nations to be able to, in an orderly way, seek asylum in the country. I think we need to expand those pathways because we see this humanitarian crisis happening in a lot of these countries. We need to be responsive to that and create a good pathway for those folks to come here legally and participate through an orderly process. What doesn't make good sense is essentially blocking and ending the asylum process for so many people in need. Because if somebody is escaping death, if somebody's escaping disaster, then they are going to try to find any way to make sure that they can keep themselves and their families safe. That's what any one of us would do. And so the expansion of Title 42 is not going to make our border more secure. Instead, what it's going to do is push families either to try to cross dangerous parts of the desert, potentially risk their lives in the Rio Grande, or as we saw with 52 people that were found dead in San Antonio. My district stretches from San Antonio up to Austin. Those 52 people died in the back of a closed tractor trailer truck. They were scorched to death in the heat because there was not a safe and legal pathway for them to apply for asylum. And so instead, they were essentially pushed into the hands of a criminal organization and died. That isn't solving the problem. If we want to actually solve the problem, we need to create safe and legal, orderly pathways for folks to seek asylum, and we need to bring the countries in the Western Hemisphere to the table and create essentially a plan with them about how it is we can stabilize those democracies and those economies.
Congressman, do you think we are close to either of those components actually happening? Because the way you lay it out there, it sounds like the solution that you're proposing is pretty simple.
It is very simple. Unfortunately, what we hear from so many Republicans today, and again, I'll distinguish this from Republicans in the past. I mean, one of the most comprehensive immigration reform bills that we've had in generations was from President Ronald Reagan. And unfortunately, we're very far away from that time, where now we see so many Republicans just continuing to talk about further militarization of the border, more walls and more military on the border. We've very clearly seen that doesn't work. Anybody that's grown up around Texas could tell you that if you go to the border now, there are more walls and more guns and more personnel on that border than ever before. But we still see an increase in migration. If we want to actually tackle our immigration issues, we need to come up with a logical response that legally allows people to immigrate. The solution is not simply more barbed wire, more tanks, more wall. We've tried that for decades, and it really has not helped with the challenge.
You're the whip of the Congressional Progressive Caucus, and your House bio says that you will, quote, fight to raise wages for millions of American workers, expand immigrant rights, restore abortion rights and voting rights, protect veterans and seniors, and tackle the climate crisis. So this is a really long list. So tangibly, what do you think you can accomplish within the next little less than 2 years you have left?
We want to make sure we protect American workers. And so I am going to be working very hard on the Farm Bill. It's a bill that tends to pass with bipartisan majorities every 5 years or so in Congress. This is a Farm Bill year, and hope to work on the Farm Bill to make sure that our farm workers and the people working in slaughterhouses and our small farmers get adequate protections so that they can get the wage increases, the safety protections, and the good jobs that we believe that the agriculture industry should be creating for the everyday person. Too often, I think we've seen our top leaders stand up just for the big guys, and we need to be standing up for the little guys. And so that's part of the work that I will be doing on the Farm Bill. I also recognize that there's important work that I can do on behalf of American workers, regardless of whether a bill passes or not. For example, in my district, we currently have ongoing the first strike of Google workers in the country. They are workers that make YouTube music run. And I recognize that I know that the newsroom is in part sometimes watched by folks on YouTube. So y'all may be watching and listening through a Google product. And you have workers demanding better wages from Google. Folks making as little as $19 an hour making YouTube music are on strike. And myself and Senator Bernie Sanders recently published a letter asking for those folks' union rights to be protected so that they can negotiate a higher wage for those YouTube workers. And so those are just a few examples of how we can start helping people right now, regardless of who controls the House, regardless of who controls the Senate. On the question of abortion care, we want to be working directly with providers of abortion medication, work directly with the Biden administration as well to make sure that in states where abortion care is banned, like in Texas, that we can still get people access to abortion care by helping people travel out of state, by helping make sure people can easily access medication abortion where it is legal. There is a lot of work that I think members of Congress can do, regardless of who controls the House, just by advocating for our constituents.
Congressman, it's interesting you mentioned the Farm Bill off of the top. I was talking to one of your colleagues, Representative Nikki Budzinski, and she said the same exact thing.
Yeah, there are certain bills that are essentially must-pass bills that make their way through the Congress, like the FAA reauthorization, and the Farm Bill. Those are really important bills that every member of Congress tries to have some input on. And my input will be trying to support small farmers and then trying to support those workers that so often get overlooked in the agriculture industry.
And she also said this could be a good area to find bipartisan support as well.
That's right. There is an increasing sense amongst Democrats and Republicans that it doesn't make good sense that there's a very small handful of companies that control almost all of the meat that is processed in this country, a very small handful of companies that control almost all the eggs that are produced in this country. And so if we want to tackle issues of inflation and rising food costs, then that might mean that we need to support our smaller producers and bring some more competition to the system if we want to decrease prices. And I would hope that that's something that we can get agreement from some number of Republicans on.
Congressman, before I let you go, I would like to do a rapid fire Q&A with you. So I'll give you some quick questions. You give me some quick answers. What do you think about that?
That sounds good.
Great. So first question, what surprised you the most since being elected to Congress?
How not surprising some things were, and also that I could get a quick PBJ off the back of the House floor.
Interesting. Have you made any new friends or allies in office so far, and who are they?
So many friends. The freshman class is amazing. There's 35 of us, but some of the folks I've gotten closest to are folks like Maxwell Frost, Delia Ramirez, Becca Ballant, Robert Garcia, Summer Lee. It's just a really great group of Democratic freshmen, and so I certainly don't feel alone.
Growing up, what political figure did you look to as the type of lawmaker you aspire to be?
Growing up, I was watching lawmakers less, but coming up as an organizer, I read up a lot on folks like Ella Baker and Cesar Chavez, people that did community organizing in decades past.
What's one sentence advice you would give your younger self?
You're going to be surprised about some of this, about kind of where this is headed. I never thought that I would be a member of Congress.
Describe today's Democratic Party in one word.
Oh, in one word. Under Leader Jeffries, I think the word we've been using is momentum.
Describe today's Republican Party in one word.
That one's even harder in one word. I'd say right now I'm disappointed.
President Biden hasn't announced a 2024 bid yet officially, but yes or no, do you want President Biden to run for re-election?
Yeah, I expect the president will announce, and I'll support him.
Who would you support if he doesn't run?
If he doesn't run, then it'll be really interesting to see who does. But I think I would support the person that meets right at the point of both being able to win and being a progressive.
Any names you think of just off the top of your head based on that criteria?
Yeah, I think that we'll just wait to see if I think the president essentially is very, very likely to run, and if he doesn't, that would be a big shift. And so on that one, I think we'll have to wait and see.
And on that one, we'll have you back if that ends up happening, but describe
that sounds good. You can have me back and ask me that again.
Great. Describe the future of the Democratic Party.
In the past, the Democratic Party, people would say that's the party of the working person. And I think that brought a big coalition of people together. And so that's what I want. I think we would like for voters to recognize the Democratic Party as the working person's party.
Describe the future of the Republican Party.
If we flip Texas, then there's not much of a future left for them unless they really change the way that they're doing business.
In one sentence, within the next 2 years, how will this Congress improve the country?
If we implement the Inflation Reduction Act, the Infrastructure and Jobs Act, the CHIPS and Science Act, then in these next 2 years, I think we'll see that President Biden, alongside the Congress, was one of the most consequential economic presidents for our country in a really long time. And so I think these are 2 years of really implementing those important laws.
And in one sentence, what do you want your legacy to be?
Just that I tried really hard to help folks.
Congressman Greg Casar, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you.